For our second chapter, we will examine sanctions and anti-money laundering measures. Karen, as the US and Europe have tightened the anti-money laundering and sanctions regimes applying to Russian oligarchs who support Vladimir Putin's military machine, and I know the situation is changing fast with suspension of applicants from Russia by many schemes, are you convinced that the Caribbean islands will not be providing bolt holes for these international criminals and their yachts? I don't want to put you on the spot about any specific jurisdictions, but as a general concept.
With the programs we work with, I think we feel, very confident in their overall due diligence regimes, including the work we provide. However, as Heyrick just mentioned, the due diligence reports that we provide are a snapshot in time. And what's really important to point out here is the importance of monitoring. The importance of monitoring for sanctions, watch list hits going forward. And that's something that I've seen pretty much with all of the programs we work with, including those in the Caribbean. I've seen that become something they consider one of the key pillars of what we provide, of what any due diligence company provides.
In addition, actually, what we are seeing is they're now looking at all of the likely parties that could be coming out of, they could have issued Citizenship 2 already that may cause them concern. So the proactive ones are asking companies like ours to do a rescrub effectively of any of the Russians, for example, that they may have given Citizenship to, and that's ahead of potential sanctions. And so they're being super proactive, and they're acutely aware. And it all comes back to they realize that the spotlight is on them, and they're so concerned about maintaining their reputation and the integrity of the programs.
If I can bring in Eddy, there have been reports of Russian oligarchs no longer welcome in Europe, seeing sanctuary in the ports of the Caribbean. Do the checks in the Caribbean jurisdictions typically involve reviews, as we were talking about, of all the international sanctions list? And is that information always followed up on?
Well, we're not checking on everyone who arrives on a yacht in every port in the Caribbean, but we are working on the citizenship schemes. So if you're an oligarch, it's pretty clear where you are. And there are many places in the world where these people aren't welcome now, and it's unlikely, I would think, they're going to choose one of the territories that has a citizenship scheme, for the very reasons that Karen said, that these are countries that are very keen, and Heyrick said, that are very keen to protect their integrity, and they value the investment that goes into their economies from these schemes and the benefits to their people and to their countries.
That said, they've chosen the UK before for the citizenship schemes.
Well, I can't comment on the UK because, again, we don't do any work for the UK government in this end. But it's probably safe to say that some of the checks that are carried out in the UK are not as rigorous as the checks that are carried out in some of the countries that we work for. From what I've read, there is probably more the UK could and should be doing on due diligence, particularly in country, and looking at background checks on people.
That's very interesting indeed, Eddy. So in your view, Eddy, are the present due diligence standards in place in the Caribbean CBI jurisdictions not just effective enough to minimize perceived and actual security risks, but you would suggest they are probably more effective than the measures in place in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, from what we have seen, absolutely, yeah. It's, you've quite clearly seen for people who've been applying for the Tier 1 visa in the UK and some of the other visas that are now in operation, the Innovator visa, the documentation and the paperwork and the checks that are carried out are nowhere near as stringent as the work that we carry out on behalf of clients in other territories.
If I can bring in Heyrick to follow up on this, we've seen significant problems with due diligence in EU jurisdictions, including Cyprus and Malta, for example. What has been the fate of some CBI programs whose due diligence standards have been put under the microscope?
Yeah, thanks, Yuri. I think I was interested you mentioned those two. They've certainly been in the public eye. The EU are obviously very keen on European integrity and the types of the access that citizenship will gain to the EU, and so they are keeping a watchful eye on anyone or any country either trying to get into the EU or who's already in the EU who have these programs. And what we've seen certainly over the past few years is a real increase and real tightening of the checks that are done in all of these programs. And to Eddy's earlier point, we will carry out the checks as part of the sort of scheme of work and the engagement criteria. They are then also put through checks by the agents prior to them being put forward to the unit. Sometimes they're double checks by two companies like us, and then they're put through the security services, often in country and on a wider basis as well. So there's been a real tightening up. Where we sort of the process ends with us is when we hand a report over, and then it's really up to the units to make their own decision on whether this is someone who they want to give citizenship to. And then, as we've all alluded to already, it's that ongoing monitoring that's really crucial to help them understand if there's been a change in circumstance.